Welcome, dearly beloved, those touched by grace. The most formidable presence in any space is the one who possesses knowledge yet patiently allows the charade to continue. Have you ever witnessed someone weaving a tapestry of lies with unwavering conviction while you held your tongue, observing how elaborate their fabricated narrative would become? This isn't mere confusion, it's calculated strategy, a spiritual game of chess. And chosen one, you've likely anticipated their moves 10 steps ahead. A compelling truth from psychological studies reveals that over 90% of communication transcends verbal expression, implying that while individuals attempt to conceal secrets with words, their very essence inadvertently reveals the truth, and the secret is out. You were fluent in deciphering those unspoken confessions. They assumed they were cunning, that you were unsuspecting. The irony. You were the silent observer, meticulously recording every detail within your spirit, feigning ignorance of their carefully constructed performance. And now they are unsettled. They are engaged in frantic mental calculations, attempting to decipher how you connected insights they didn't even realize existed. You had no need to solicit answers or demand explanations because you already possessed the truth. Not through intrusion or espionage, but through discernment, your inherent gift. Intuition serves as your internal compass, and divine insight is your superpower. This is not simply another narrative of perceived deception. It transcends that. This embodies spiritual perception. They believed they were manipulating you while you diligently studied their behavioral patterns, their energy fluctuations, and the intricate nuances of their falsehoods. Now they are not only shocked, they are consumed with paranoia, questioning the duration of your knowledge, the recipients of your shared insights, and the actions you intend to take with the truth. Prepare yourself, because in this discourse we will unveil the origin of your uncanny accuracy, which has left them in awe, and illuminate why feigning ignorance was the most strategic decision you ever made. And if you've ever pretended to be surprised simply to safeguard your tranquility, then this is especially for you. First, you refrained from asking questions because you were focused on discerning motives, not merely absorbing stories. You seldom posed excessive questions because deep within you weren't seeking to hear their rendition of events. You were vigilantly observing the underlying motivation propelling their words. You were never interested in surface-level trivialities. What truly captivated your attention was the underlying reason for their disclosures, the information they withheld, and the energetic signals emanating from them as they spoke. While many become entangled in the spoken words, you remained attuned to the pauses, the hesitations, the subtle shifts in their gaze. You inherently understood that words could deceive, but energy never could. Therefore, rather than confronting every dubious detail or pursuing the elusive truth, you allowed them to speak freely. You fostered an environment of ease. You permitted them to believe they had ensnared you within their narrative, when in reality you were methodically gathering data. You were mentally cataloging every inconsistency, every contradiction, every peculiar reaction they exhibited when the topic strayed too close to the truth. You had no need to interrupt them. You allowed them to incriminate themselves with their own utterances, silently, calmly, patiently. They mistook your silence for ignorance, but it signified your attentiveness, your understanding, your willingness to allow the truth to emerge organically. You didn't arrive at conclusions through paranoia. You identified the warning signs. You simply chose not to reveal your awareness prematurely. That level of self-control frightened them because in retrospect they realized you never genuinely questioned them because you already knew the answers. They simply hadn't articulated them aloud. And that is what is currently baffling them. That while they were acting, performing, and attempting to manipulate the narrative, you remained fully aware throughout. Your inquiries were never intended to gather information. They were designed as subtle assessments. You didn't require clarity because you possessed discernment. You weren't seeking facts. You were deciphering the spiritual subtext. Now they are revisiting every conversation, recognizing how exposed they truly were. And it haunts them because they weren't deceiving someone oblivious. They were performing for someone who had already memorized the script. You never needed to pose the perfect question to elicit the truth. You simply needed to remain composed long enough for them to betray themselves, which they did repeatedly without even realizing it. Second, you allowed them to fabricate stories because you needed to assess the extent of their deception. You knowingly allowed them to lie to you not because you were naive, not because you were oblivious, but because you sought to understand the depths of their depravity. You needed to comprehend the full spectrum of their character, not solely the facade they present when striving to appear respectable. And nothing exposes an individual more swiftly than granting them the freedom to lie while you feign ignorance. You weren't caught off guard. You recognized the lie as soon as it left their lips. You simply didn't react. You allowed them to believe they were succeeding in their deception. You observed them constructing a growing edifice of falsehoods, unaware that you were meticulously documenting their actions. Not through physical records, but through spiritual impressions. You were creating mental snapshots, identifying patterns, and connecting disparate pieces of information. You weren't emotionally wounded by the lie. You were disheartened by their ease in deceiving you while looking you directly in the eye. But that disappointment was necessary. You needed to know the truth of their character when they believed you weren't paying attention. That is why you didn't interrupt. That is why you didn't confront them immediately, because catching them in a lie wouldn't have revealed their full potential for deception. Allowing them to lie without resistance did. You were studying the profundity of their deceit. You weren't simply catching them in the act. You were witnessing them build a world constructed upon falsehoods with complete assurance. What they failed to consider was your training for this very scenario. Life had taught you how to interpret silence, how to detect tension, how to recognize the precise moment someone's eyes betray their inner turmoil. They mistook your kindness for ignorance. They were unaware that you had been raised amidst manipulators. As a result, you became fluent in the language of lies long ago. You simply chose to no longer speak it. Now the truth is revealed and they are stunned. They cannot fathom that you were aware all along, but that is the most painful realization for them. Not their act of lying, but that you allowed them to lie and still retained your power. You didn't expose them according to their schedule. You waited until they had inflicted significant damage upon themselves, and now there is no recovery from it. You knowingly allowed them to walk into their own traps smiling. Third, they failed to realize you were engaged in spiritual eavesdropping. They didn't realize you were spiritually eavesdropping throughout. While they engaged in clandestine discussions behind closed doors, whispered their schemes, and spoke ill of you in private, your spirit had already intercepted everything. That is the factor they overlooked. They believed that if they spoke where you couldn't physically hear them, you would remain unaware. However, they forgot one crucial element: you operate beyond the physical realm. You hear in the spirit. You interpret the atmosphere. You sense the temperature of a room fluctuate when your name is mentioned in your absence. Your accuracy didn't stem from guesswork. It wasn't intuition as most people perceive it. You weren't connecting dots. The truth was being delivered directly to your spirit like divine correspondence. God was revealing information. Your dreams were providing you with details. Your spirit would experience discomfort in the presence of certain individuals before your mind could even comprehend why. And now it becomes clear why some people suddenly began acting strangely, withdrawing or altering their energy around you. You didn't physically witness their conversations, but you felt the essence of their words. You perceived their intentions even before they verbalized them. That is what startled them, because you began responding to actions they hadn't yet admitted to performing. You began disengaging without possessing concrete evidence. You shifted your energy without any direct confrontation. They couldn't understand how you knew. They never imagined that your source wasn't human. It was divine. They underestimated the closeness of God's presence in your life. They assumed that if they remained silent in your presence, they were safe, but your spirit could access realms they were unaware you had access to. And now they are uneasy. They are questioning what else you know. They are reconsidering every conversation they've had, wondering if any information slipped out inadvertently. But nothing escaped their control. You simply possess the ability to see. You simply possess knowledge, not because someone disclosed it to you, but because your gift exposes truths that were never meant to remain hidden. They were so intent on blocking your ears, they forgot that you don't require physical hearing. You hear with your soul. You hear with your inner knowing. And now they realize that you didn't need to be physically present to comprehend their words. You were always 2 realms ahead. Fourth, your composure was a trap they unknowingly entered. Your composure was the setup, and they walked directly into it. They mistook your silence for ignorance, your tranquility for vulnerability. They assumed that because you didn't react, you were unaware, but that was the deception. You weren't perplexed. You were observing. You weren't paralyzed. You were calculating. Each time they believed they were succeeding in their deception, you were one step closer to confirming your initial suspicions. Individuals of that nature only comprehend chaos. They anticipate retaliation, confrontation, or public exposure. Therefore, when you denied them any of those responses, they assumed you were oblivious to the true nature of events. But the truth is, your silence was your form of surveillance. You weren't disengaged. You were meticulously storing every word, every nuance, every contradiction within your spirit. Your composure didn't stem from uncertainty. It arose from a prior decision and an understanding that timing was crucial. They believed they were safe because you smiled, because you remained silent, because you continued to demonstrate grace and stillness. But each time you occupied that silence, you were affording them greater opportunity to reveal their true selves. You didn't need to chase the truth. You allowed it to unfold organically, as it inevitably does when someone feels comfortable behaving recklessly in the presence of someone they deem too naive to notice. They underestimated you because you weren't ostentatious. They didn't realize that your power resided in your apparent indifference, but deep within you were far removed from the drama. You had already recognized the betrayal. You had already seen through the insincere support. You were simply allowing them to continue digging, not out of spite, but because some individuals will remain unconvinced until they are buried beneath the weight of their own lies. Now they are mired in the wreckage, baffled by the rapidity of their downfall. But the truth is, you foresaw it all along. You simply didn't panic. You allowed peace to guide your actions. You allowed stillness to conceal you in plain sight. And now that the storm has subsided, they are left speechless, not merely because you were aware, but because you remained unfazed as they walked directly into the trap they had intended for you. Fifth, your accuracy offends them because it exposes their entire constructed identity. Your accuracy offends them because it transcends the mere identification of a mistake. It completely removes their mask. You didn't simply detect an oversight. You didn't merely uncover a concealed truth. What you witnessed was the entirety of their performance. The persona they cultivated, the image they projected, the intricate web of lies they relied upon for social, emotional, and even spiritual survival. And with a single moment of quiet precision, you shattered it all with your clarity. They weren't simply living a lie, they were the embodiment of the lie. Their entire identity was meticulously crafted to impress, manipulate, or conceal. Therefore, when your insight pierced through that facade, it didn't simply bruise their ego. It exposed the emptiness of their contrived existence. Your gift didn't merely uncover something trivial. It exposed the entire system they utilized to function. A system of pretense, of performance, of controlling the perceptions of others. They are not simply angered that you knew. They are disturbed that you could perceive them without being explicitly informed, because if you could see it, who else will? If you deconstructed it so effortlessly, how fragile was it to begin with? That is where fear arises. You didn't merely ruin a story. You dismantled a false identity they had depended on for years. And that level of exposure feels akin to death for someone who based their self-worth on illusion. They assumed they had the advantage. They believed they controlled the narrative, but when you spoke, when you revealed even a fraction of your understanding, it shook them because your discernment penetrated directly to their core. It didn't challenge specifics. It confronted their essence, and that is something they cannot defend. Now they are uneasy in your presence, not because you have caused them harm, but because they can no longer maintain their pretense. You have become the mirror that reflects the aspects of themselves they attempt to conceal from the world and from themselves. You didn't attempt to ruin them. You didn't even attempt to expose them publicly, but your truth alone rendered their false reality unsustainable. Your accuracy is menacing not because it is violent, but because it is undeniable. And now they are scrambling not merely to recover, but to reconstruct something that was never real. Sixth, they believed you required evidence, but you were the evidence. They assumed you needed definitive proof such as text messages, screenshots, or a witness to corroborate your intuition, but you never needed any of that because you were the evidence. The instant your energy shifted, the instant you withdrew, the instant you ceased engaging with their performance, that was the indication that something was amiss. You didn't argue. You didn't plead for truth. You simply aligned yourself with the information your spirit had already conveyed, and that was sufficient. What they failed to comprehend is that your knowing doesn't arise from speculation or doubt. It isn't paranoia. It isn't excessive analysis. It is divine clarity. Your spirit was aware before your mind could even articulate it. You weren't awaiting external validation. You were the confirmation, the alteration in your energy, your changed demeanor, the sudden silence they sensed from you. That was your response. You didn't proclaim it, you embodied it. They anticipated that you would fight for validation. They assumed you would investigate, expose, and attempt to convince others of what was occurring, but you didn't need to. Because when you embody truth, you don't pursue evidence. You are the disruption. Your tranquility amidst the chaos caused them to question everything. Your stillness was more resounding than any evidence they believed you lacked. They assumed they had succeeded in their deception because you didn't react in the manner they expected, but what they overlooked was that you weren't paralyzed. You were simply certain. You were so grounded in the information your spirit had revealed that you felt no need to dispute it. You felt no need to substantiate it. Your detachment was the most resounding declaration they could have received. Now they are spiraling not because you exposed them, but because they realize your composure wasn't due to confusion. It was confirmation. The fact that you are no longer available to them, no longer perpetuating the lie, no longer mirroring their facade, that alone is your evidence, and it is irrefutable. You didn't need to catch them in the act. You didn't require anyone else to confirm what had transpired. The truth resided within your being before it manifested in your reality, and now they are left with a chilling realization: the one individual they attempted to deceive never required proof because you possessed the truth all along. Seventh, they are not merely shocked that you knew. They are fearful of what else you perceive. They are not simply surprised that you discovered their deception. They are genuinely afraid now, because if you detected that, what else have you perceived? What else do you know that you are withholding? That is what haunts them. It isn't solely the fact that you were correct. It is the unsettling silence you maintain after being proven right. They anticipated a confrontation. They anticipated noise, but you offered them none of that, and that is what is causing them to unravel. They are engaged in mental gymnastics, revisiting every interaction, replaying every falsehood, scrutinizing every instance where they lowered their defenses around you, wondering if you observed more than you revealed. And deep down, they recognize that you did, because you have always possessed exceptional clarity, comprehended situations swiftly, and responded with remarkable composure. They cannot help but wonder, what do you really know? The fact that you haven't disclosed everything exacerbates their unease because now they are not merely grappling with guilt. They are living in fear of future revelations. Your silence has become their paranoia. You didn't expose them, you didn't retaliate, but your very presence is eliciting an inexplicable response. It is unsettling, it is oppressive. It feels as though they have been seen and cannot undo it. You didn't merely make them nervous. You have heightened their awareness because you possess a degree of insight that compels individuals to question their own deceptions. You navigate with a level of knowing that requires no validation, and that is terrifying to someone who relies on manipulation for survival. You are a threat not because of your loudness, but because of your accuracy, and more disturbingly, your quiet accuracy. They underestimated you once. They won't repeat that mistake. Now each time you glance at them, they wonder what you are perceiving. Each time you speak, they contemplate whether there is a hidden meaning. And each time you remain silent, they speculate whether that is the moment you choose to withhold something. Again, your awareness has altered the power dynamics. They no longer control the narrative. You do. And even though you are not weaponizing your knowledge, the mere possibility that you could is what keeps them awake at night. Your presence has become a reminder that nothing concealed remains hidden indefinitely, not when someone like you is present. Eighth, they confessed without conscious awareness. You were interpreting their subconscious throughout. They confessed without even realizing it. And that is what is currently perplexing them. While they believed they were maintaining their composure, smiling, conversing, and feigning normalcy, you were detecting every minor shift, every micro-expression, every instance where their eyes faltered or their energy wavered. They were unaware that their body was revealing the truth their mouth attempted to conceal. You weren't solely listening to their words. You were observing the inconsistencies between their statements and their delivery. You were never deceived by polished phrases or rehearsed narratives. You were attuned to the spaces between their sentences, the tension in their jaw, the flicker in their eye, the insincere laughter that occurred a fraction of a second too late. That is what revealed everything to you. Their nervous habits betrayed them. Their tendency to over-explain or evade direct questions revealed more than any confession could have. They assumed they were being cunning, but you were already 10 steps ahead, deciphering their intentions in real time. People often forget that the body never lies. The subconscious invariably leaks the truth, and you have trained yourself consciously or spiritually to interpret that language. While they were exerting effort to perform, you were locked onto their patterns, detecting the subtle cracks in their facade. They were unaware that every hesitation served as a highlight. Every insincere smile represented a warning sign. Every contradiction allowed you to observe the rearrangement of puzzle pieces. Now they are nervous, they are unsure of what precisely betrayed them, but they sense that you know, and the reason they feel that way is that deep down they recognize they weren't entirely composed around you. They recognize that something slipped. They are simply unable to pinpoint how or when. That is why your presence now unsettles them. You don't need to utter a word. They feel exposed simply by standing near you. You weren't interpreting their story. You were interpreting their soul. That is the distinction. You didn't need confessions. You didn't need them to admit anything. They confessed with their posture, their tone, with every minor detail they assumed you wouldn't perceive. But you did all of it. And now they recognize that you were never deceived. You simply remained silent as they incriminated themselves piece by piece. Ninth, you allowed them to believe they were deceiving you because you needed them to reveal their ultimate strategy. You allowed them to believe they were succeeding in their deception. You could have intervened early, could have severed ties the moment you sensed that initial red flag, but you refrained not out of blindness but out of observation. You were fully aware of the unfolding events, but you chose not to disrupt the performance prematurely. You needed to see how far they were willing to go. You needed to comprehend their ultimate objective, because that is where the genuine truth resides. You provided them with the space to perpetuate their falsehoods. You made it effortless. You smiled. You nodded. You played along sufficiently to maintain their sense of ease within their deception. Why? Because individuals become careless when they believe they are winning. They cease to conceal their intentions as meticulously. They reveal more of their hand, and that is precisely what you awaited. The moment they exposed not only their tactics but also their true motives. The ultimate strategy invariably reveals the true purpose of the game. They assumed your silence signified confusion, but you were not confused. You were calculating, you were mapping patterns. You were observing their behavior when they believed you were emotionally invested. And as painful as it was, you possessed the patience to allow the scenario to unfold, because superficial betrayal is easily detectable, but you were seeking something deeper. You needed to understand their true nature when they believed they had you completely under their control. The moment they executed their final move, the one they believed would break you, that was when you perceived everything with clarity. Not only their actions, but also why they acted in that manner. Their facade crumbled not because you forcibly removed it, but because their confidence in your silence led them to remove it themselves. And when it fell there, it was the truth in its entirety. No pretense, no backtracking, simply raw intention staring directly at you. Now they are shocked because the individual they believed they were deceiving was 3 steps ahead throughout. And what is most painful is the realization that you didn't stop them. You allowed them to progress that far solely to confirm your suspicions, solely to observe them incriminate themselves without pressure, accusations, or exposure, only your quiet, deadly knowing. 10th, your insight transcended mere analysis. It was ancestral. Your insight didn't stem from excessive rumination or the connection of superficial dots. It arose from deep ancestral memory. What you experienced wasn't a hunch. It wasn't solely intuition. It was something ancient, something encoded within your spirit before you ever entered the situation. You didn't simply sense that something was amiss. You knew, and that knowing didn't originate with you. It was passed down through generations. Your ancestors have witnessed this before. The betrayal, the manipulation, the charm disguised as benevolent intent. They lived through it, survived it, and now they communicate through you, not with words, but with sudden awareness, with the constriction in your chest when something feels wrong, with the internal alarms that trigger before your conscious mind comprehends the reason. They weren't merely narratives from the past. They were lessons embedded within your bones. And during those moments when you sensed a shift, you were experiencing their collective memory rising to protect you. So dearly beloved, remember this: your ability to discern, to see beyond the surface, isn't just a personality quirk. It's a superpower, a legacy, a divine gift. It's about recognizing the patterns, trusting your intuition, and understanding that sometimes the most powerful action is simply observing with a quiet, knowing heart. Embrace this gift, use it wisely, and always remember that your silence can be a potent force for unveiling truth. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a similar situation where feigning ignorance was your greatest strength? Share your thoughts, your questions, or any insights you've gained in the comments below. Let's learn from each other. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'm always sharing insights and perspectives to help you navigate the complexities of life with clarity and grace. You wouldn't want to miss out on our next exploration, would you? Until then, keep shining your light and trust your inner knowing. Inner knowing. Inner knowing. Inner knowing. Inner knowing.